Ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished keynote speaker today has generously accepted to take questions and answers. We will follow the same format that we have been doing throughout the course of the day. If you just raise your hand, an usher will pick up your question, and then we will read the questions from the stage. It is now my distinct privilege to ask the honorary chairman of the Baker Institute, you know all his other titles, to introduce our distinguished keynote speaker today, Mr. Baker.
Thank you very much, Ed. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure and privilege for me to introduce our keynote speaker, and we are really honored that she would take time out of her busy schedule in Washington to be with us this afternoon. I was telling her on the way in, I know what it takes to interrupt a schedule such as she has up there in order to participate in these kinds of events, and we are really deeply appreciative. She's the nation's chief law enforcement officer, of course, and she is one of the highest ranking officials in the executive branch of government. More importantly, she's one of our country's most respected experts on crime prevention. After taking her law degree from Harvard in 1963, she began a successful legal career in private practice, rising to partner status in the prestigious Miami-based law firm of Steele, Hector, and Davis. Then in 1978, her life changed forever. That was the year that she was appointed by the governor of Florida to serve as the state attorney for Dade County, a position that she retained through 5 successful elections, or another 15 years. There are no more challenging jobs in law enforcement than serving as state attorney in Dade County, Florida. And by the end of her tenure, there were few more admired figures in American law enforcement than our speaker. President Clinton recognized this when he chose her to serve as the 78th Attorney General of the United States. Since then, she's discharged her office in a way that has won her the plaudits of the law enforcement community and the general public alike. She is a byword in Washington for straight talk, for firm action, and for absolute dedication to duty. In a word, our keynote speaker embodies the very best in public service today. As I said, we deeply appreciate her finding time in her hectic schedule to join us, and we eagerly await her remarks on a subject of vital interest, not just to those here today, but to all Americans. Ladies and gentlemen, the Attorney General of the United States, the Honorable Janet Reno.
Thank you, Secretary Baker. I've only had one of those jobs. You've had 2 of them during very challenging times, and I admire you so much, and it is a great honor for me to be introduced by you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about urban crime and violence in the last part of this century. We have some good news. Violence is down in most major American cities. Youth violence, measured by arrest rates, is down for the first time in many years. The youth murder rate is down significantly in 2 years. But I, as a prosecutor in Miami, thought that I was beginning to win the battle in 1985, when suddenly the crack epidemic hit our community and the crime rate started back up. And I know we can take nothing for granted. We've got to learn from our experience and put what works to work across this nation, and I am convinced that it can be done. I'd like to turn the topic just a bit and say, what about urban and rural crime and violence in America in the last part of this century? Because I have discovered in my travels across this nation that the problem of violence is everywhere. I would like to approach my remarks from 2 perspectives. One, the principles by which we address the problem, how we approach the puzzle, and then what are the pieces of the puzzle. When we discuss crime, there has been a tendency over history for people to take one position. This person is for rehabilitation, this person is for punishment, this person is an advocate just of community policing. But I look at it not just as one solution, but as a puzzle for which there are many pieces that have to come together to effect the solution. It requires a balance of punishment and prevention. And I think, and it is my earnest hope, that we can begin this year now with an approach to the problem that is bipartisan or nonpartisan, and that in America we assume a new tradition of focusing on crime enforcement and crime prevention, just as we do when we go to war, when Democrats and Republicans come together and join together without criticism, but focusing together on what can be done to solve the war, to win the war, to solve the problem of crime. I have had the opportunity now to watch Republican sheriffs, Republican prosecutors working with Democratic U.S. attorneys in effective crime fighting in their community. I worked with my Republican colleagues in Miami. Crime should not be a partisan issue. It can be approached from a common sense point of view that can make a difference. And I think if we take the experience that so many communities have had and forge that partnership across this nation, we can make a difference. The third principle by which we must approach the problem is to approach it analytically. There is a tendency, or has been in history, to just approach one situation as it arises, to respond to a call. But far better that we take the hard data that we can develop and correlate now through automation and see just what is happening in each one of our communities or in our rural counties, to find out the patterns, to understand who's committing the crime, to design effective tactics and strategy to deal with the facts as they appear. Let's focus on it like business people focus on a problem and get it solved the right way. Let's focus on it like public health specialists focus on an epidemic and understand the course of the epidemic, the significance of the symptoms, and what can be done to cure it. But let us be hard-nosed in our solutions. There is a tendency to say, and I'm for tougher sentences, without finding the prison cells to go with the tougher sentences. There is a tendency to say, and we're going to crack down on this type of crime, without cracking down on it, but just doing it in words. It is imperative, if we're going to have a continued long-range impact on crime in America, on crime and violence in America, that we do not just talk tough, but we design solutions that have the dollars behind them, the planning behind them that can make them real. And then, instead of just throwing up our hands if the one solution doesn't work, let us look at it, see why it's not working, refine it, or if it's just plain a failure, let's toss it out and go on to the next. But let us plan this strategically, and I think we can make a difference. There is a tendency on the part of some to say, but I don't have enough dollars in my community to really deal with this issue. Dollars are sometimes just an excuse. I think there is a tendency in this nation that began in the Depression to look to Washington for dollars. And with the Depression, people thought that Washington might have solutions. With the war, people looked to Washington for solutions ever more firmly. In the 50s and 60s, they looked to Washington to enforce our civil rights. In the 70s, they looked to Washington for more dollars for grant programs. In the 80s, Washington started shifting the programs to the states, oftentimes without the dollars. And then the states shifted the programs to communities, oftentimes without the dollars. And something magical has happened in community after community across America in these last 10 years. With their backs up against the wall, citizens are coming together, and they're seeing what resources exist in their community that have been bifurcated or fragmented, and they're suddenly beginning to bring those resources together to make a difference. The next principle that should be applied to this effort is that we have to make an investment up front. As a prosecutor, when I first took office, I looked at a 17-year-old's rap sheet after I had adjudicated him delinquent for armed robbery. And I could see 4 or 5 points along the way where we could have intervened to have made a difference in that child's life. So we developed a dropout prevention program with our local public schools because there was a direct connection between delinquency and dropouts in middle school and in high school. But soon it became clear that that was too little, too late, for already the child had fallen a grade level or 2 behind and was beginning to act out in other ways to attract attention to themselves. So we developed an early neighborhood intervention program focused around Head Start. But then the year 1985 came, and the crack epidemic hit Miami, and the doctors took me to our public hospital to try to figure out what to do about crack-involved infants and their mothers. I looked at children who were in bassinets for 6 weeks at a time, not held or talked to except when changed and fed, because we couldn't figure out what to do with them. We couldn't send them home with their mothers. There was no place to put them. And those children were not beginning to react with human emotion, whereas the child across the room who was born with severe birth defects was beginning to act out in human ways as both parents were with her around the clock as much as possible. And the child development expert sat me down and said, "These first 3 years are the most formative time in a person's life. This is the time a person learns the concept of reward and punishment and develops a conscience. 50% of all learned human response is learned in the first year of life." And it became clear to me that what good would all the prisons be 18 years from now if that child never learned what punishment was all about, or if that child never developed a conscience? What good would all the educational opportunity be 15 years from now if that child didn't have the foundation upon which to learn and we wasted money in remediation? What would the employer do who could not find the people with the skills necessary to fill the jobs 15 years from now because we had failed to make an investment up front? So as I apply principles to the puzzle that I try to solve, an early investment and a continuing investment is critical, I believe, to filling in the pieces. But most critical of all is a focus on communities, on that strength that I discussed, on the power that exists in communities. I used to resent it when the feds came to town. They'd tell me, "You need to do this and this and this, and you should do this and this." And I looked at them, none of them were from Miami, and I said, "What do you know about Miami? We understand our needs and resources far better than you do. Why don't you be our partner?" And I think it is so important to understand that each community is going to be different, with a different problem. And for that reason, I have tried to form a partnership with state and local law enforcement and with community leaders, saying, "You tell us what you need and let us work together with you to share what resources exist, to provide what technical expertise we might have available that can assist you, and to solve the problem together, not concerned about who gets the credit or whose turf we are on." That whole concept of partnership needs to be applied as we bring together the pieces of the puzzle between federal, state, and local government, between the business sector and the government sector, between schools and between police, and between us all and the citizens of our community. Our very goal should be to make our citizens self-sufficient, to give our families the strength to be the appropriate caregivers, and to harness the tremendous energy that exists out there amongst children, amongst young people, amongst so many. One of my favorite stories is of a community meeting that I went to, and an old man stood up and he said, "Do you know what I do 3 hours a week, 3 days a week, 3 hours a morning, and do you know how old I am?" And I said, "No, sir, I don't." He said, "I'm 84 years old and I volunteer as a teacher's aide." And the first grade teacher for whom he volunteered stood up and said, "This man is magical for the children with learning disabilities. He has the patience of Job, and he does such incredible things with those gifted children and challenges them far beyond the time I have to challenge them with the number of students I have in my class." We have got to harness the energy of America. in volunteer efforts that can truly make a difference. And to do that, one of the pieces I believe that communities must develop is how we organize our volunteers. About 2 weeks ago, I volunteered for a Saturday at Habitat for Humanity. I wondered how people could get organized when they had no skills. And for the 6 hours we worked there, I never saw anyone do anything that wasn't absolutely productive in terms of finishing that house. If we can take the challenges and the organizational skills that have been exhibited in Habitat and apply it in tutoring, and apply it in organizing doctors to deliver services to children who are in need of preventative medical care, we can make such an extraordinary difference. What are the pieces of this puzzle? How do we apply these principles to what pieces? The first piece is punishment. We have got to make sure that there is fair, firm punishment that fits the crime. Too many youngsters, too many adult offenders think they can get away with it because there is nothing that happens to them after they are brought into the criminal justice system. They may be put on probation with a probation officer whose caseload is so huge that there can be no consequence. They may be sentenced to 5 years in state prison and out in 1 year and 20% of the sentence because we don't have enough prison cells. As we design our correctional system, we must mean what we say and we must carry through. That 14-year-old has got to know that there is no excuse for putting a gun up beside somebody's head, that if you do that, you're going to face a certain sanction that fits the crime. But we have got to ensure fairness, and we have got to make sure that any appearance of disparity is corrected so that all the people can have confidence in the system. To that end, we've got to look at the issue that exists now, the disparity that exists between the sentences for crack cocaine and powder cocaine, and work together to come up with a balanced approach that can reflect the dangers that crack imposes on a community, while at the same time assuring greater equity in the balance of these substances. But as we take our correctional principles, we've got to realize that there are different offenders. There are career criminals who are very appropriate subjects for 3 strikes and you're out. If you commit an armed robbery at 18 and go to prison, get back out 6 months later, commit another armed robbery and go to prison, the third time you are just probably 1 step away from committing a murder in the course of a bank robbery, and you deserve to go away. But there are many offenders who are going to prison for shorter terms. And we have got to make sure that those short-term offenders serve the sentence that the court has imposed so that people can understand there's going to be a sanction. I think the greatest crime problem we face in terms of violence is the problem of youth violence. One of the reasons that exists is because we have failed to make an investment in a juvenile justice system because we'd rather wait to build expensive prisons down the road. We've got to make an investment up front and make sure that we have adequate facilities for serious youthful offenders. A 14-year-old armed robber cannot be left out on the streets in many situations. There have got to be secure facilities that can protect the community while giving us an opportunity to get that 14-year-old off to the fresh start. But I think one of the biggest problems in the juvenile justice system in so many places in this nation today is that the 12-year-old comes into the system for a minor crime, stealing from the local lumber store. He comes in, the court has a tremendous caseload. In too many jurisdictions of this nation, nothing much is done. That first time round, he's sent home. He comes back in at 13 with another offense, relatively minor. He's sent home. And he thinks nothing is going to happen to him. Let us impose a fair, thoughtful sanction that might involve some service, but let us analyze why that child is committing a crime, and let us take steps at that first time to intervene and to see what can be done to solve the original cause of the crime. But while we have these people in custody, either constructive or in detention, let us look at what the problem is. It makes no sense to send somebody into the juvenile justice system who's already 2 grade levels behind in reading because they haven't been properly supervised at home, to send them in for 3 months without skills, and to send them right back to the open-air drug market where they got into trouble in the first place. I think it is imperative that we focus, while we have these children in custody, on programs that can make a difference in their lives. It won't work if it's just a month in or 2 months in and a slap here and a dab here. If we're going to change lives, let's do it in a thorough, constructive way. And if anybody argues that it costs too much, it's going to cost a lot more down the line as we try to invest in prisons and try to overcome the tragedies of crimes committed down the road. And that leads to the second factor, the second piece of the puzzle, and probably the most neglected piece of all, aftercare. What if we do everything right while that youngster is in detention? What if we do everything right while that 25-year-old is in an appropriate correctional setting? If we send them back to the apartment over the open-air drug market where they got into trouble in the first place, without having support mechanisms and supervision in the community, we're just going to see the revolving door that we see in too many situations now. And whenever we talk about corrections or detention, I think it is imperative that we talk about aftercare and follow-up that can make such a significant difference. I have seen an extraordinary program underway in New York City where offenders are taken to a boot camp for 6 months, prepared for the outside world, taught how to interview, taught how to get to work on time, taught job skills, and then they come back and under close supervision, they've got to go out and find the job. But while they're finding the job, the system is providing them work opportunities so that they can learn the discipline of work. That program is working, and let us take these models and put them into effect across the nation. There are many offenders in prison today who are mothers with infant children. They don't know how to raise their children. But again, in New York State, there is a marvelous program underway where the nursery exists in the prison. And these mothers are learning for the first time in their lives how to be effective parents. And they are going into aftercare as they leave the prison with supervision and support in the community that furthers their parenting skills. I think one best told me, she said, "Ms. Reno, I've lost some children on the outside. I don't know where they are now, in foster care or someplace. But I'm not going to lose this child because I've learned for the first time at 30 how to be a parent." We can do so much if we make an investment in aftercare. That leads, however, to the third piece of the puzzle, community intervention. How do we organize our communities to focus on urban crime and violence? First, I think it is imperative that the federal government reach out to local prosecutors, the local sheriff, the local chief of police, and say, how can we work with you? Not as a one-way street, but as a partner in developing an exchange of information, in taking cases that are appropriate in the federal forum, and supporting local police by providing intelligence and information in other forums. We have had in effect since March of 1994 an anti-violence initiative that tries to focus on what's in the best interest of the community, not who gets the credit, not whose turf is involved, but what's best for the community, what's best for reducing crime, what's best for getting the guilty convicted according to due process and fair play. But that's not enough. Dr. Lee Brown is probably one of the pioneers in this country in forging an effort called community policing. I sometimes call it just old-fashioned policing. Policing which involves officers who know their community and know the people in their community and have the trust of the people in their community. Officers who go out to neighborhoods and involve them in identifying problems and priorities. and then work with them in attaining the solutions to those problems. Police officers who are accountable for a community, who are responsible for knowing what is happening in terms of crime and what steps are being taken to solve it. Talk about bipartisanship. It was an extraordinary moment for me to visit with the current mayor of the city of New York and have him tell me that the last of the Dinkins-Brown police were coming on and that they deserved the credit for them, Mayor Dinkins and Dr. Brown. If we can approach this from a bipartisan point of view and say, let's work together in our communities in developing community policing programs that can make a difference, we can have an impact. Let us explore what we can do more in terms of developing conflict resolution programs that can teach our police officers not to create the conflict, but to resolve the conflict through mediation, to reach out to youngsters and help them negotiate out their conflicts before they erupt in violence. But let us go further and recognize that it's not just community policing. Why not develop community probation programs? So many probation programs are operated from the state level, and there is not the context of community or neighborhood in a probation officer's caseload. What if we assign community police officers, community probation officers, community prosecutors, and a community court to a high crime area with significant numbers of children and family at risk? People say we don't have the money, but it would really mean a reallocation of resources and focusing on people and involving people in solving the problems. This is happening. In Boston today, community probation officers are working hand in hand with community police officers in identifying kids who are on probation, young adult offenders who have come back to the community and are taking steps to provide the aftercare that I think is so critical. And then as we focus and organize our community, let us look at what is happening there. What are the dangers? Clearly, guns in the hands of kids. Through the community policing program, we have tried to design, in conjunction with local law enforcement programs, that will get guns out of the hands of kids. Kansas City has developed just such an initiative, and we are going to be in the process of sharing with all concerned what can be done to focus on those who don't belong to have the guns and to do everything possible to get them out of their hands. Let us focus on victims from a public health perspective. If you go to a hospital with in a catchment area with significant youth violence, the nurses and the doctors will tell you that the victim of today may well be the perpetrator of 3 weeks from now as he engages in revenge. We can do so much if we intervene with the children who come flocking to the hospital to see what happened to their friend and resolve the dispute or the gang violence up front before it starts. That leads to gangs. Again, we can be so effective if police officers focus on the leaders of the gangs and take them out through effective enforcement efforts, while at the same time reaching out to those kids that are about to get involved and pull them back through mentoring programs that can make a significant difference. Let us focus on drugs and use our dollars the right way. In Miami, we developed a drug court that has assumed different forms across the nation now as it has spread, but it basically operates out of a good old-fashioned carrot and stick approach. It says to a first offender charged with the possession of a small amount of drugs, look, you can work with us in treatment, you're going to be intensely supervised by the court, you will be intensely supervised over a year's period, and if you straighten up, fly right, and test negatively for drugs, we'll work with you in job training and placement and getting you back to the community with a chance of success. But if you mess up along the way, you are going to face a more certain sanction each step of the way. These programs are working because they are operated on the basis of common sense, because we mean what we say when we carry through. Let us use more programs like that to reach out to youngsters. One of the most critical problems that we need to face in communities as we organize our efforts is domestic violence. When I took office in Miami, I went to the medical examiner to find out why people had been killed during the previous 20 years. We assigned interns to go through the records. 40% of the homicides were related to domestic violence: husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, ex-spouse. At that time, nobody was interested in it. They wrote it off as a domestic. We can't write off domestic violence anymore in this nation, and Congress has acted by passing the Violence Against Women Act, which is providing significant funding to every state in the nation to develop bold and innovative programs, whether it be battered spouse shelters or programs with police agencies to develop effective and expert domestic violence units, or domestic violence courts. If we work together to interrupt the cycle of violence and let people understand that it will not be tolerated, we will make a difference. We must, because the child who watches his father beat his mother comes to accept violence as a way of life. And unless we stop violence in the home, we will never stop it in the streets and in the schools of this nation. But it requires more than just a response from the criminal justice system. It has been exciting for me in these 3.5 years to see the medical community respond so significantly, and to see people recognize that domestic violence is as much a public health problem as it is a criminal justice problem. And if doctors and emergency room physicians and the general practitioner, instead of just sewing up the wound caused by domestic violence, refers the person for counseling, we can intervene before some of the real tragedies occur. We can do so much if we focus on truancy prevention. Most police agencies will tell you that they can substantially reduce daytime crime through effective truancy enforcement programs, but they don't have any place to take the child. They take him back to school, the school calls home, the mother doesn't respond, and the school sends the child home. What if we developed teams in this country, as an example, with a police officer, a counselor, and a public health nurse who made a home visit to find out what the problem was and to see what we could do to intervene in a voluntary way at that point to make a difference in that child's life. Recently, some police officers who had been involved in anti-gang activities in Miami got on their bicycles and rode 500 miles to Tallahassee, the state capital, to let the state legislature know that these police officers, who have been very effective in law enforcement, are very hard-nosed police officers because I know them, but who have now worked long enough on gang activity to know that police aren't going to solve the problem by themselves, that we have got to develop prevention programs that can make a difference for our children. 10 days ago at the International Association of Chiefs of Police meeting in Phoenix, the refrain was the same. Police chiefs are talking about prevention as critical to the solution of the urban crime problem. And if you visit at the National Sheriff's Association, they will tell you the same thing. How do we do it? That's the fourth piece of the puzzle, prevention. And there are so many different pieces, really, that go into this fourth piece. Starting young with parenting programs that can make a difference. Strong parents, strong families are by far and away the best prevention, the best caregiver. But how do we get there? First of all, there are programs that are working in this country to reduce teen pregnancy. And if we're interested in solving the problems of urban America, we need to look at what programs are working and replicate them across this nation. We need to make sure that we don't wait till a woman goes to prison to learn parenting skills, but that she learns it in high school or in other appropriate settings, so that she understands what raising a child is all about. We've got to make sure that it is as important in this nation to collect child support as it is to collect income tax. And our mechanism for collecting child support should be as effective as our mechanism for collecting income tax. But most of all, I think we've got to look at what we can do in our workplaces. I remember my afternoons after school and in the evening. My mother worked in the home, my father worked downtown. My mother taught us to bake cakes, to appreciate Beethoven's symphonies. She taught us to play fair, she punished us, and she loved us with all her heart. And there is no child care in the world that will ever be a substitute for what that lady was in our life. Somehow or another, in this nation of such advanced technology, we've got to design our workplaces so that both parents can spend some quality time with their children. I think it's possible. And it is fascinating to see young people coming out of college today or out of law school as interested in what they are going to get paid, as interested in what family benefits they're going to have and family leave opportunities they're going to have as they are in what they are going to get paid. Secondly, we must focus on providing preventative medical care for our youngsters. As I looked at those pre-sentence investigations as a prosecutor in Miami, I could see points along the way where with better medical care, proper treatment for that high fever, proper attention to a learning deficiency that was caused by emotional problems, we could have kept that kid out of trouble. Something is wrong with a nation that says to a person 70 years of age, you can have an operation that extends your life expectancy by 3 years no matter what. And yet we turn to children of the working poor or of the poor and say, sorry, you can't have preventative medical care because it's simply not available. We can make a difference. And when people say, but what about the dollars? Just think of how many pediatricians you know would volunteer their time if liability issues were not at stake and if we could work through the bureaucracy. Let us be bold and creative as we approach the problems of reweaving the fabric of community around our children at risk. If those child development experts were right when they talked to me about crack-involved infants, if the first 3 years of life are so critical, and it's interesting because since I came to Washington, I've used these figures again and again, and the press will dispute me about this or that or the other, and others will, but they haven't disputed me about those figures. Then we've got to develop a better approach, not to child care, but to what I call educare. If those first 3 years of life are so important, then our child care institutions where children have to have child care must be designed to provide strong, supportive educare and not just warehousing. And that leads to education. Something is wrong with a nation that pays its football players in the 6-digit figures and pays its school teachers what we pay them. We have got... They are playing catch-up ball in addition to being not paid very well because they are receiving children who do not have the foundations, and they are having to provide remedial programs at every grade level along the way. We need to make the investment up front, but we need never to give up on any generation of our children. And we need to do everything we can to be creative and to be supportive of teachers who want to innovate and be creative to deal with the young people's issues. How we teach basic skills, how we teach a young person just to look you in the eye, how we teach a young person to reach out and shake a hand, how we teach a young person to get to work on time, how we teach a young person simply how to be able to converse so that they can get the job done or to learn the lesson. But more than that, with technology and the state it's in today, we've got to teach our young people skills that will enable them to earn a living wage when they graduate. Not only are they receiving children who have not been given a strong foundation, but think of what has happened in the last 25 years in terms of the burst of knowledge and teachers having to keep up with it. We can do so much, but part of our great arena, part of the great piece of the puzzle for urban crime is going to be found in what we do to make our schools bolder, more creative, and to back up the wonderful teachers who struggle day in and day out against overwhelming odds to make such a significant difference in the lives of so many children. But those teachers will let that child go home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and with both parents working and so many single parents, that child will be alone in too many instances. We've got to develop after-school and evening programs with volunteers, with mentors, programs that can provide constructive pursuits for our young people. As the gang police officers told the legislature and the governor in Tallahassee, if you can find something for these kids to do in the afternoon, if you can help us organize some programs, we can keep an awful lot of them out of trouble and prevent a lot of crime. People talk to me about the problem being too big. They wring their hands and they say, I just don't know what to do. My mother raised me to believe that this country could do anything it really wanted to do if it put its mind to it and if it was right, and if they really concentrated. For 3.5 years, I've had an opportunity to see so many different people in this country trying to make a difference, and I've never, ever been so sure that she was right. You see the strength of this nation in so many different ways. And the people of Oklahoma City on that Sunday after that terrible tragedy, how they pulled themselves together, how they organized, how they reached out to victims and to survivors and helped them begin to heal, how they supported law enforcement, how they spoke out against violence and terror that had been caused. It was extraordinary. You go to so many communities across this nation, and you see citizens working with police officers and youngsters volunteering. This nation can do it. All we have to do is use common sense and take it step by step, child by child, family by family, school by school, block by block, city by city, and we can take back America for our children and make it safe for them again.
We have many questions and limited time. 2 questions related to drugs, at least 2. What is your view on the argument that crack penalties are racist? And related, what is the street cost of cocaine, and what does it say about our interdiction efforts?
I didn't hear the second question.
What is the street cost of cocaine, and what does it say about our interdiction efforts?
First of all, I think, as I indicated earlier in my remarks, we're going to have to address the issue of the terrible 101-to-1 disparity that exists between crack and powder cocaine. And my understanding is that the Sentencing Commission may be addressing that today. Most experts tell me that crack has a disparate impact on communities, but I don't believe that it's 100-to-1, and I think we have got to address that issue. With respect to the street price of cocaine was the question, and what does that say about interdiction? It will vary from community to community. Interdiction in and of itself without focused intelligence may not be the most effective way, but interdiction carefully done, focused on intelligence that it develops, can be a very effective tool.
Should we consider decriminalizing, say, marijuana?
No.
I take it that there's no ambiguity in that response. What is your view of sentencing guidelines?
I operated under sentencing guidelines in Florida from 1983 until I came to Washington, and it had more flexibility than do the federal guidelines. I think that the guidelines, it is important to recognize that guidelines can be very, very useful in assuring equity in sentencing and in providing a sentencing framework that makes sense. But we have got at the same time to make sure that we use the guidelines in the right way to see that justice is done.
Do you believe that the special prosecutor law should be changed?
We have testified before Congress with respect to some of the changes that should be undertaken. The testimony was given by a career prosecutor who has worked in the Justice Department and has been responsible for implementing the law over some time. I prefer to wait till the processes are through to reach any conclusions as to what would be appropriate.
By some estimates, welfare reform could push 1 million children into poverty. What would be the effect on long-term crime?
Horrible. I think the correlation between poverty and the debilitating world it breeds clearly will have an impact. I think that's why it's so important that we work together with the states to make sure that welfare reform is real, that people are given truly an opportunity to work at constructive jobs, that we address the issue of child care. It's not going to help to say to a mother, you've got to go to work while your child remains unsupervised. We've got to develop a sensible, rational approach, and it is my hope that we can work with the states in these months to come, see what needs to be done to make the law as effective as possible at achieving the reform that everyone wants, while at the same time making sure that the legislation does not have a disastrous effect.
Do you believe that police work is hampered by the Miranda Act and the exclusionary rule?
No.
You do not.
I served in a committee that held public hearings across the country in the late 80s, headed by Sam Dash. We held hearings in Washington, St. Louis, and Los Angeles, and then we solicited information from police chiefs across the country, and there was a clear consensus that neither Miranda nor the exclusionary rule impaired or hampered good police work. What was clear was that we needed to do more in terms of training people, but the very professional officers that we talked to did not feel that it hampered them.
Many crime-fighting initiatives enacted by the Clinton administration have been criticized by some as part of a steady but increasing restriction of civil liberties, such as curfews, the V-chip proposal, suggestion of mandatory drug testing for driving licenses. Is the future of crime fighting going to be predicated on a steady increase of such restrictions, especially as monitoring technologies become more available, or is there some sort of natural limit to this approach?
I think in terms of the V-chip and other factors, you can design it clearly constitutionally. I don't think that there is a constitutional limitation. What were some of the other points that... Curfew?
Mandatory drug testing
again,
for driving lessons.
The curfew that says to a child, you cannot be out past 12:30, when there is no basis for concluding by the community setting that there is a danger in children being unsupervised and on the streets at 12:30, that probably would not be held constitutional. Where the courts have been provided, where the community that has passed the curfew has provided them with a sound, reasonable basis based in fact and in experience and in statistics, I think the court will uphold the curfews. But as a caution, a curfew does no good if you say to the child, come on, I'm taking you home, when the parents aren't there or where they are passed out on alcohol or drugs and there is no program that can provide an appropriate substitute. So I think curfews can be an appropriate tool. I think they can be a constitutional tool when designed correctly based on facts and figures and a reasonable basis that may exist in the community. And I think they can be an effective tool if programs, afternoons and in the evenings, are provided that can make a difference.
Two last questions. What is your view of laws permitting concealed weapons?
Permitting concealed weapons? Personally, and this is not the view of the administration, I used to look at the difference. We spent more time trying to prove whether the weapon was concealed or not concealed. Was it butt hidden? Was this, could you see this from under the seat? And it used to occur to me that the most sensible way would be to just say, you shouldn't have a gun unless you have demonstrated clearly that you know how to safely and lawfully use it. And whether you carry it outside or inside, the really important issue, do you know how to safely and lawfully use it, and have you evidenced the ability to safely and lawfully use it?
Last question. Would you please elaborate on your plans to continue the work you have been doing in the second Clinton administration?
That will be for the President to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Attorney General Reno. Thank you very much for your comprehensive and incisive analysis of the issues of urban and rural crime and violence. Let me say again, once again, on behalf of all of us here, how very grateful we are to you for taking time out of what I know is a very busy schedule to be with us. And let me say to all of you out there that we will break for lunch and reconvene here in this hall at 3 p.m. for the first panel on devolution of government. Thank you all very much.